If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this. Campers and rangers, what's the most unsettling, supernatural thing that's happened to you while in the woods? When I was a kid hiking along a coastal national forest area with my friend and his dad, I went alone down an overgrown side trail to pee. I noticed a stench from the main trail that we figured was a dead animal somewhere nearby was getting more powerful as I went a short distance down that side trail. Stopped at a tree to do my business and found some trash scattered at the base of it and a cardboard sign leaned against it that read "Come and find me" with an arrow pointing further down the overgrown trail. At that point, the stench was so powerful that my nose was starting to burn. Couldn't pee with my mind freaking me out with all kinds of images of what the hell could be further down that trail, so I went back to the main trail and didn't say anything to my friend or his dad about what I'd seen until I couldn't hold my pee anymore and asked his dad to stop again so I could pee. When we got back to town, he called it in to the local sheriff. Don't know what they found, if anything, but I can't help but still imagine some suicidal man's corpse or a bunch of dead animals a budding serial killer slaughtered and arranged somewhere down the trail. I went camping in Big Sur, California with one of my best friends. It was off-season and a Sunday night, so the place was practically empty. We picked a campsite about a half-mile walk to the ocean. It was in a huge open field surrounded by a lush forest. In the background were limestone mountains and you could hear the crashing of the ocean's waves. Very epic. We spend the night around a campfire telling stories and eating. We're both pretty experienced backpackers too. We are very diligent in ensuring we do not leave any trace of food by our site, and almost everything other than our essentials goes in the bear bag/box. I have my dog with me too. She's Ada, so she was allowed on the site. She's leashed around one of the few trees in the field on a long metal leash and full harness. It's a full moon out, and it was pouring beautiful blue light across the field. It was absolutely pristine and breathtaking. Around 1 a.m., something spooks my dog. Now, she is used to the woods and has an incredibly calm demeanor. But, she is flipping out, tugging hard on the leash like she is desperate to escape, and she does. She pulls so hard that her harness snaps and she goes bolting across the field into the wilderness. I lose my cool. I drop everything and bolt after her. I'm not thinking straight running into the woods at night. My only concern was getting her, even if it meant risking my own safety. I rescue her. I find her curled up in a random clearing in the woods, looking ashamed and terrified. Thank God she ran in a straight line, otherwise I would have been totally lost. I walk back carrying her and my heart is pounding furiously at the horror of the idea of her being lost in the wilderness forever. The thought now is still unbearable. I can feel her heart pounding too in my arms. She's still terrified. I'm no longer in a great mood. We all head to bed in my tent, but my dog won't lay down. She refuses. Her ears are up and she's staring intensely at the tent wall, as if she could see through it and she's tracking something. It takes a while for my nerves to calm down from my chase earlier. I'm working hard at taking deep breaths and reminding myself that I'm prepared for anything that I could encounter. That my dog is simply spooked from maybe a raccoon. Maybe she's just exhausted and acting up. And then I hear it, cackling. Like a high-pitched laughter that is full of a disgusting type of joy, and it's coming from outside my tent. Fuck deep breathing. My senses go on high alert, my body tenses up so tightly it's like I'm about to break in half. I can't even breath. And then I hear even more cackling, like a group of witches were doing something evil just yards away. It fills my hearing, laughing and more laughing. It's loud and it just sounds so wrong. I can't even bring myself to move to look at my friend. It's like my entire body has given up. The laughs are then followed up with blood-curdling screams. It honestly sounded like somebody was being murdered. It was full of panic and horror and sadness. Dear God. It could have been wolves or coyotes killing their prey. But it sounded so distinctly human, the laughter, the sobbing, the screams. Finally my friend says something, What the fuck? I even begin to laugh a little because the situation was so intense and wild, I had no idea how else to react. I can't handle this, I say, and suggest that we bolt for the car. It's a mile away, so we decide to stay out. We just listen to the laughter and screaming until it fades away. Even when it was over, I didn't bother going to bed. Sitting on rock by the campfire one moonless night, eating cookies before bedding down when I noticed a quick single glint a short distance away. The effect was very much like a firefly, except there are no such things in this region. Caught the glint numerous times, and it seemed to be circling the site. It soon stopped, and after the hair on the back of my neck settled I reached down for another cookie and realized none were there. The hairs on my neck went to full alert, and I instinctively leaned towards the fire while I placed a couple more cookies, this time keeping my hand near them. Felt a wet nuzzle and froze still. Turned cautiously to see a small one-eyed fox busily munching my cookies. We became friends. He stayed close. Was camping in West Texas, at a campsite that had canvas tents pre-installed in clearings. They get hot, so we had the tent flaps open on both sides, with the lights out because bugs like light. Was bunking with one other person and we were up very late. There was a full moon and it was bright out, sorta breezy, everyone else is either asleep or quiet. We start to hear rustling nearby, but from the side that is facing the woods. We just brush it off. Then we hear it closer, and we assume it is other campers coming to scare us. Then we hear it closer but from inside the clearing. At this point we are sorta freaked out and refuse to look, we are just staring at each other and staying close to the walls of the tent. We see a white something massive, in the flash of the tent flaps moving in the breeze. It is right outside the tent. I hold my breath and my heart is in my stomach. We see it again after a moment, on the other side. This isn't a person, it has a texture like fur. Finally, after what felt like a half hour, we hear it retreating and after that, a howl in the distance in the woods. The next day we tell other people and a few say that they saw a white wolf near our campsite too. It was terrifying to think that a wolf was circling our tent. What's more terrifying is that apparently no gray wolves or any subspecies of them have existed in Texas since the 70s. So, full moon, white wolf, the hell? Definitely a ghost, y'all. My friend and I went camping in the Appalachian Mountains, near Knoxville. We hiked for the day and slept inside an open log shelter. This was in February and the whole forest was covered in snow, about knee deep, so everything was dead quiet. At some weird hour woke up to sounds of footstep and then some scratching right on the other side of the shelter. I was shitting bricks being sure that a fucking bear is coming around to sniff some food out. Even so, I was too tired and too cold to move, so I basically ignored it. 15 minutes went by and I didn't hear anything else, so I just dozed off. Next morning, recalling the incident, I check all around the shelter only to find pristine snowfall with no trace of anything having been there. I know for a fact it didn't snow last night because our footprints on the way in was undisturbed. To this day I still have no fucking idea what that was. I was camping and backpacking out in northeastern Oregon, way out in the middle of nowhere with 15 other people from my Boy Scouts troop a little over 6 years ago. I was 14 at the time. Nearest town was about 50 miles as the crow flies away, and it had like a population of less than 200. Nearest population center you could call a city was easily over 200 miles away. We were sitting around our campfire late at night after a day of hard hiking in the early August heat, shooting the shit, no drugs or drinking since it was a Boy Scouts thing. It was a couple years before we got into that. When around midnight we see what looks like a huge comet in the sky. It just appeared out of nowhere. It was a full moon with clear skies that night, and it was easily twice as big as the moon, so it was either really close, really big, or both. We all noticed this huge thing in the sky and watch as it lazily moved across the sky and are just sitting there in awe. It was actually rather beautiful. Then it just stops in its tracks and sits there for a good 20 seconds to half a minute. Just a big, very bright, practically glittering, ball hanging there in the night sky perfectly still. Then it broke into 5 smaller balls that darted into random directions at incredible speeds. 2 went up into the sky and vanished, another went parallel to the ground and also vanished, and the other 2 shot towards the ground and vanished when they got close enough to the ground to be obscured by the hills in the distance. The hills were about 10 miles away. We had actually camped in those hills the night before. We all are sitting there thinking about what the utter fuck we just saw in silence, when another comet-looking ball of light appears in about the same spot. It does the same thing, moving slowly, stopping for about 20 seconds, and then breaking up into smaller balls that speed off at impossible speeds. That's when this weird feeling I've never felt before and haven't felt since hit me. I don't know what to even call it, but it didn't feel good. Dread, fear, hate, anxiety, none of those are really accurate. It wasn't as pressing or urgent as those. It just felt wrong. Like whatever part of me that decides what emotions to assign to stimuli couldn't decide what feeling to assign to this, it just knew this wasn't right. The consensus around the campfire was that everyone was feeling the same thing. We couldn't exactly say what we were feeling, it just didn't feel good. None of us could sleep that night, we just sat in our tents. One scout said, "Everyone start praying, now." No one objected, and half of us were non-religious. I never prayed before that, and haven't since, but I just sat there with my hand clasped together asking whatever is out there to please have whatever the fuck that was leave me alone. For the rest of the trip we never went somewhere alone. All of us agree on what we saw, all 16 of us. Even to this day when I try and talk to these guys about this the response is always some variant of yes, I remember that, let's please not talk about it. I don't know what the hell I saw exactly. I'm not going to jump to conclusions and say it was aliens, ghosts, a secret government project or any shit like that. Maybe it was one of those things, but I don't got definitive proof. I just don't know what in the fuck I saw. This happened about 8 years ago. I was 21 and working as a camp counselor for Camp Tommy in Fishkill, New York. This was a place where it's basically a bunch of cabins in the woods on top of a mountain. The cabins are all like half a mile apart from each other, so you're pretty isolated in the woods. One night at about 1 a.m. I was sneaking off to meet my camp GF. You're supposed to stay in your cabins after 10 p.m., as was usual, and was cutting through some woods to get her to cabin. Suddenly I heard rustling in the woods, and stopped to investigate it. There are bears/other animals, so I was expecting something like that. This 3-foot humanoid type thing suddenly jumps out of the bushes spooked and looks at me. It's too dark for me to make out any of its features, other than it was standing on 2 feet, had 2 arms, and basically looked just like a miniature person without any features, just looked solid black. If it had clothes on, I would have been able to notice that. I was really curious what it was, so I started walking towards it, and it must have got more spooked because it bolted back into the woods. I'll never forget how mechanical it looked as it took off running too. Its whole body basically shifted 90 degrees, like if someone was doing the robot dance, and it just took off. I have never seen anything on 2 legs run that quickly, so I was pretty confused about what it was. I'm a pretty fast runner and fit person in general, but this thing was on another level of fast. As much as I try to make sense of it, I still to this day have no idea WTF it was. It was very human, but too short to be a human. 3 feet tall is about accurate, and I really don't know how a human could run that fast anyways. I have no freaking idea, but it's always bugged me. Maybe one day I will go back to try and find this creature again. When I was a teenager, I used to go out camping by myself. I had a spot where I liked that was across a few fences from my grandparents' house in the middle of nowhere. One of the places I cut through was a pasture full of cattle. Around cattle, especially cattle unfamiliar with me, I try to be very careful to not spook them, but otherwise cows are pretty easygoing. This was about a mile from my grandparents' house and probably about 2 from my destination. The one time I am thinking of the last time, I slipped through the fence to find the cattle already freaked out. They were insanely agitated about something I was not aware of, so I stayed well clear of them as I went through the pasture. I had a good time camping that night and packed up the next morning. As I went back into that pasture, however, there was this ridiculously bad smell. It smelled like a skunk had fought with something in a fertilizer barrel of shit and then the barrel broke open. It was awful. I tried to look around for the cows to make sure they were not going to surprise me, and I could not find them. They were just gone. There was some brush and trees, though, so I thought they were just out of sight. I keep walking through the place to get home, and the smell is so bad that I set down my stuff at the fence line and decide to investigate. Well, I found the cows. All of them were shot and ripped apart. Someone had carefully shot them in the head with a bolt gun style thing or hit them hard enough with a pointy object to bust through their skulls, and eviscerated all of them. They had also dragged them all into a little shallow ravine and piled the bodies up. It was horrible. I hightailed it out of there back to my gear. My stuff was gone. As in, I set it right here on this rock and it is not within eyeshot. A quick glance showed me there was not anything ripped or fallen out, so someone had picked it up while I was 200 yards away for less than 5 minutes. I think Usain Bolt would not have been able to catch me on the way home. I never heard anything else about those cows, and I did not go back to the old camping spot again. This happened to me and my girlfriend a few months ago while we were backpacking in Rocky Mountain National Park. We did 3 nights of backwoods backpacking and before that 3 nights of car camping at one of the campsites. On the second night it was a full moon, and with the altitude, low light pollution, and clear air, the moon was so bright we could see color and read clearly. That night I woke up in the middle of the night and noticed a glowing orb through the roof of the tent. I realized fairly quickly that it was the moon, which I thought was pretty neat that we could see it inside our tent. This is an important bit of backstory. Jump ahead to the second night in the back country. Our campsite is the most remote of the 3. Easily 4 miles of difficult hiking from any reasonably sized trailhead, and in a dense pine forest. When we get there we see some things left behind like a hatchet sheath, hammock bag, and some tent stakes. I went to check out the pit toilet and saw there was a sleeping bag left on the ground. It is reasonable that whoever this stuff belonged to just hiked straight to their car in one day, but it looked like they left in a hurry, and I have no clue why the sleeping bag was over 200 feet from the campsite. I am not easily shaken and an experienced hiker, but I was definitely getting a strange vibe from this spot and was being really cautious about bears or whatever. My girlfriend was also getting a strange vibe, she later told me. Now this is where the background ends. That night I woke up again in the middle of the night and noticed a glowing orb about the size of a basketball shining through the tent. I kept waking up for a few hours scaring myself by what it could possibly be, but finally convinced myself it was the moon and got to bed. In the morning it was obvious there is no possible way this was the moon. For one, the light was on the wall a foot and a half from the ground and we were in a dense pine forest. You couldn't see 200 feet from you, let alone the sky. Now we never figured out what it was, but my best guess is that there was someone shining our tent with a spotlight waiting for us to get out and investigate, but all we know is that it definitely wasn't the moon. In the morning my girlfriend said she saw it too. So it wasn't sleep paralysis. When I was stationed in NC, we went to go to our yearly tear gas chamber, which is out in the middle of the woods. We did the chamber, walk out, and I go walk to the corner of the hooch to blow a massive snot rocket because the tear gas clogs you the fuck up. I look up and see a big pile of shiny crimson and brown mess. Naturally I go take a look and all it is the innards of something large. Just sitting there in a very neat pile. They looked pretty fresh. There was no blood, no tracks, no evidence that anything happened there other than the huge pile of guts. The area was kind of sandy, so there definitely should have been tracks. Shit was weird. About a week or two later we went out to the field for some good old motivated infantry training. First day out there we had a long night patrol to do. My squad sets out, with me leading, and not even 15 minutes into it, I stumble into an old foxhole. By stumble I mean dropped like a sack of rocks thanks to all the gear I had on me. It felt like there were a bunch of branches down there and I felt a couple bugs crawl around on me. No big deal, I'm used to it at this point. When a couple of my squad mates are helping pull me out, the fourth one shines his flashlight and everyone starts to flip shit and smacking the hell out of me. The foxhole was basically a brown recluse breeding ground, and I fell right into it. Yeah. Not so used to that. After throwing my camis and gear off and shaking the fuck out of it all, the guy with the flashlight is looking in the foxhole and saying holy fuck real slow. There had to have been a million spiders in there and the bottom was filled with bones. Lots of bones. We left without any more hesitation. I spent 7 years with SAR and have seen interesting things. I am also an avid outdoorsman and regularly take backpacking trips alone out into the deep wilderness of the mountains. I stopped doing them alone a couple years ago. Too many strange happenings and predatory animals which seem to like stalking lone hikers out there. Anyways, out in the Olympic National Forest area of Washington State I was in a tent on a family property as a bunch of us were staying the weekend. It's pretty remote. I woke up at 2 a.m. and had to piss like a horse because I had several beers that night before bed. It's dead silent out there aside from the river that goes by the property. It's dark, deep silent forest around us. Ancient old growth. I make the decision to get it over with and step outside the tent to piss in the dark and the hair on the back of my neck stands up. I don't think much about it and go back to the tent, crawl into my sleeping bag. The second I had that thing zipped back up around me, a mountain lion, not 15 feet from where I had been pissing, screams like a banshee at the top of its lungs directly in my direction. It was the sound only lions and women being murdered make. It sounded angry that I had disappeared. As I was still buzzed, it was not hard to fall back asleep knowing it would not attack the tent. But I've never before heard this sound so close before and it is spine-chilling. My cousin is with the Forest Service in the Montana/Wyoming area and I decided to go up there with her to literally test the waters. She does hydrology and has to ride out to the middle of nowhere to test streams and snow runoff to ensure no contaminants, so I thought that sounded fun and wanted to do a bit of a tour with her. We were going to have to camp out there for 2 nights, so we packed up all our gear in saddlebags or saddle bundles and started out. The first day and night was amazing. Beautiful scenery and amazing air quality. It really is so peaceful out there. I love that area and wish I got to go up there more often. Anyway, we started out on the second day and my cousin said, "You want to see something weird?" Of course I said yes, so she led me on a bit of a side journey into this tiny little ravine. We ended up traveling about 2 hours away from our actual path we had laid out. At the very end of this fold in the land, she dismounts and tells me to get off my horse, too. We tie them up in this gorgeous little clearing and she tells me to follow this tiny wildlife path and bring our little rechargeable radio. It is one of those you can plug in or wind up, and it also acts as a lantern if you really need it to, but that kills the batteries quickly. I do, and, out in the middle of fucking nowhere, there is a huge coil of wire sticking out of the ground. The wire itself was not weirdly large, like some buried transmission wire, but small, like 10 or 12 gauge wiring for a house. It trailed off into the brush and trees, so naturally I decided to follow the damn thing out of curiosity. My cousin trails behind me as I do, and this wire, after coming straight up from the ground, is strung across limbs of trees then back to the ground, then it snakes around rocks and finally dead ends into an outlet. That outlet is mounted on the side of a desk. It looks like a school teacher's desk from when I was growing up, with a metal base and a pseudo-wood/plastic top thing. No chair, no building, no nothing, just this outlet and this desk. I am staring confused as all hell at this desk in the middle of a forest when my cousin takes the radio, pulls out the cord, and plugs it into the outlet. That fucker then lit up and started blaring static. The wire was being fed from somewhere. Now, the place where we were had no road access, no buildings for many miles, and no other people around. And yet, there was a live outlet. Weird as shit. I think the outlet was mounted to a set of stairs in the middle of nowhere. From the world or something. This is going to be a long one, guys. Did my fair share of camping as a youth growing up in far north Queensland. We'd do it as teenagers to go pig hunting on big ol' farms on the tablelands. The farmers would pay us good cash to shoot some kangaroos and wild pigs which can get into their crops there. Anyways, me and 3 friends were doing a bit of pig hunting on a school holiday. We'd been out for 3 days already and had 2 days to go, bagged a fair share of rooms which the farmer would pay us good money for, so we were all having fun and enjoying the freedom of being young youths. To give you perspective, this particular farm was huge. Off-road driving could take easily more than 3 hours to get from one side to the other. It was really remote and often you didn't feel you were on a farm, just on someone's private land. The farmer told us we were the only folks camping during that time, so to be wary about any strangers we'd come across, as they shouldn't be there. Anyways, on our second last night we set up camp near a lot of trees and reasonably close to the river. Nice little flat sandy area, perfect for a campsite. Built a fire, settled in for the evening. Had a car radio bursting out some tunes from some random station we could pick up. Talking shit around the fire and doing a bit of drinking. That night, getting close to midnight, we turned the radio off and started to settle down, just talking shit about going back to school. That's when we heard some voices. We're talking beautiful female voices, kind of singing far off in the distance. Kind of drifting on the wind. At first I thought it was me imagining it, but my friends all went silent and we listened to these voices that sounded like they were singing. There was a long pause of us all looking at each other like, WTF are we hearing? The voices were coming far off in the forest near our campsite, but close enough for us to kind of hear laughter and generally very nice singing. One of my mates is Aboriginal. Local black Australian, I shit you not, he went white. Like a ghost. He seriously looked white in the dark. I asked him what's up and he told us whatever we do, don't follow or go check out those voices. Aboriginal folks got stories of these very long slender type of people that live in the bushland, and they'll sing/talk to hikers/campers to lure them off the main tracks. People used to go missing way back when in Aboriginal history, so the elders would always warn the community not to listen to the voices. Often they would call to you when you were out hiking to come see what they have found or to come help. Some of the stories suggested they would eat you. It was the first time he believed his elders' stories as the first time he'd heard them, but he swore it's what his elders warned them about. Very nice voices, sounding very inviting. He seriously believed this. Me and my other mate were a bit disbelieving. We thought some young girls might be out there having a bit of fun camping, and with a bit of drink were considering going out. As we were discussing it, the voices seemed to get a bit closer, and my Aboriginal friend told us to not speak to them and to stay by the fire. He literally threw more wood on the fire to make it brighter. We started getting pretty tense. The voices were around our campsite for about 30 to 40 minutes easily, within 50 m of us now. Very clear, beautiful sounding voices, and sometimes I swear to God I heard them say, "Come join us." But they went away. Next day we looked around the area, couldn't find any tracks at all. We were pretty experienced at tracking animals, and people make big ass tracks. True story. We'll never forget it. We spoke to the farmer about the voices and he told us they come and go as they please, these voices. He's sometimes heard them when he's in his house. He also believes in the Aboriginal legends. My dad and I used to go canoeing in the Adirondacks every summer when I was growing up, from around 8 to 15. This particular summer, there happened to be a nasty storm that hit NY State. On our last night/day, we were woken a few times in the night when the storm was picking up, and by sunup, the skies and winds were raging hard. We knew we had to get out soon, but we still needed to eat, right? We forego tea and boiling water for the remainder of our group and granola bars, and I reach outside the tent to grab the food. Just as I lean back inside the tent after grabbing the food, we hear a loud crack. I looked at my dad, and suddenly I'm looking at the roof of our caved-in tent. A large tree branch had snapped from the wind force and fallen on our tent, directly between the two of us. The branches had caught enough of me surrounding trees that it didn't hit the ground, where our legs were, resting just between our heads. We got out of there pretty fast, having only 4 to 5 miles left to go in our canoe back to the car. Driving home later that day after East storm had passed, we saw that thousands of trees had gone down, power knocked out, and we heard that even 7 or so people had died during the storm. It wasn't a game. Camping across Canada, my wife and I were in the Badlands of Saskatchewan. We followed some signs into a below-grade oasis of a campground. Apple trees, lush grass fields, and very sheltered as it was basically in a valley. It was beautiful. There was no one at what appeared to be the registration hut, so we found a spot and started to set up. Slowly, it dawned on us that there was no one around. As in nowhere, no tents, no trailers, not even any parked cars, and this was near dusk at the height of summer. There was evidence of people having been there, just no one there with us. It was also dead silent, in an oppressive way. Birds weren't even singing. We both also started to feel like we were being watched, not by just 1 or 2 people but lots and lots of them, especially from behind the trees. The more we looked and walked around, the stronger that feeling became. The people didn't feel alive, which made the feeling even worse. There was a history to this place and we could feel that. By this point we were looking over our shoulders. We had done a lot of camping, both wild and campground, but had never felt so freaked out as we were right then. We packed up and found another spot a few miles away. Next day we were looking at some petroglyphs and struck up a conversation with a native guy. We told him our story, describing where we were. He just nodded and said, "Yeah, that's a very, very spiritual place for us." It was pretty special to hear a native guy tell us about an important place to his ancestors in front of petroglyphs made by the very same people that we felt the day before. 28 years later, this story still freaks us out when we tell it. I guess this isn't objectively freaky, but looking at it as a whole I found it really unsettling. Something weird about it. I went fishing at like 5:30 am sunrise. Weekday. It's not very far from town, but definitely not a well-known spot. You would see a couple fishermen out there in spring. This was during the summertime and I would just go out there and drink with my line in the water, nothing really to catch. In summer I would see mostly the few people that live nearby walking their dogs or teens going to make out. This was kinda early summer, so I was out there at the crack of dawn to maybe catch something. Fishing was only good from spring rains and fish spawning in spring. The way this area is, there's 2 rivers in a Y shape with about 5 to 10 miles of dense woods between them. One side is accessible by a park with trails, but the river is way big. The side I am is accessed by backwoods roads and is tiny and shitty, but the river would still be hard to cross. On the other 2 sides is several miles of woods to either the highway or a lake. So I'm out there at dawn, on a weekday, in summertime. I see this guy on the other side of the river. He is wearing a perfectly clean white shirt. He didn't really bolt away, but he skittered off. It's just weird, he either crossed the river or went through several miles of wood and then changed his shirt. It's always weird seeing someone in the middle of nowhere, but he didn't look like a hobo, hiker, or a fisherman, and was on the wrong side of the river in rough-ass woods but wearing a completely clean shirt. I was hiking alone and found this beautiful spot just off the trail. It was like a grassy knoll formed by an oxbow in a river I was following. To the left and right of me were small feeder streams, and the river was at the bottom of a 150-foot sand dune. Across the river the woods rolled out in waves as far as I could see. I set up camp and then decided to climb down the river when I first noticed these crude wooden crosses laid out in the grass. I thought they were curious, but didn't give them much concern. On my way back from the river I noticed more of them hanging from some of the trees in the area. I ignored them and camped for the night. Nothing spooky happened during the trip, but the weekend after I returned I watched the Blair Witch Project in the theater. Yes, that long ago. The movie brought back memories of all those crosses on the ground and in the trees. Had I seen that movie before camping, I would have noped it right out there and left the tent behind. Staying in a small cabin with a few family and friends on a lake in the far north Maine woods. Oh, and it's the middle of winter, so there is a ton of snow and the lake is completely frozen. The cabin does not have indoor plumbing and all the beds were located on the second floor loft, so in order to relieve ourselves we had to grab a flashlight and melt the snow off the back deck. So it's the middle of the night and everyone is sound asleep. I wake up needing to empty my bladder and carefully make my way down the narrow ladder and slide open the back door. The cabin is one of 4 on the entire lake, and earlier in the day we visited the other cabins to see if anyone else was up for the weekend. We all know each other and like to say hello, but nobody, it was just us and hundreds of miles of frozen forest. So I get out there and start to do my business when I hear the faintest music coming from down the lake near the boat landing. As I concentrate I realize I know the tune. It's old-timey circus calliope music. Like what you hear from a merry-go-round or circus pipe organ. I don't think much of it at the time as I am pretty dazed from sleep and a day full of drinking. It actually only freaked me out the next morning when I put it all together that we were completely alone on the lake and no one in their right mind would be out there, let alone playing calliope music. I talked to my uncle who guides in the area about it, and after a moment of silence, the only thing he had to say about it was that the boat landing used to be a dance hall and rec area around the turn of the century when wealthy lumber barons would sled their families up in carriages and spend a short winter vacation on the lake. Spooky ass shit. 2 friends and I decided to go stargazing one night, so we loaded up my friend's truck. We had this awesome spot, a giant clearing surrounded by tall grass we knew about that was about an hour and a half outside of the city, and we had gone to this exact spot earlier in the year during winter, so we thought a nice summer night would be worth stargazing in the same spot. We set up the telescope and spent around 3 or so hours stargazing until we decided to just relax and look at the stars. I laid down in front of my mate's truck while he and our other friend relaxed on the hood. I was on my phone while they spoke above me when they suddenly went quiet. I curiously looked up to see why they went silent, only to find them pointing their torches towards the large grass in the distance. I asked what was wrong and they insisted that they heard footsteps rushing towards the truck. They instantly decided to end the night and pack up. This had me feeling a little tense as they weren't normally this agitated by things like this. We began packing up when in the distance, in the tall grass, we heard gravel and dirt crushing under heavy feet. I thought at first it may have been a kangaroo, but the footsteps felt way too human to be an animal like that. The footsteps continued to stomp until I yelled out asking who was there, and that's when they stopped. For about 5 or so seconds there was nothing. My friends and I sat silently shining our torches towards the direction we heard the walking when suddenly we heard the footsteps move rapidly. The grass around where we heard the footsteps began to shake and move, leading to us screaming loudly, throwing the telescope and gear right into the truck fully unpacked, shortly followed by us speeding away. I to this day still have no idea what caused them, but I believe it may have been a curious resident that may have lived on the mountain investigating our noise. Still creepy though. Used to work as a ranger at Philmont Scout Ranch in New Mexico. If you don't know what it is, think summer camp combined with a backpacking trek. Have a couple fun stories. 1. So there's a place on the ranch called Araca Mesa, and there's all sorts of local legends, probably also exaggerated by the staff, about it being haunted, a portal to the underworld, Anasazi burial ground, etc. If you look at a topo map, the mesa looks like a profile shot of a human skull, so there's that. Anyway, one of the stories about the mesa is that at night you can see weird lights coming from the top. I've been there for 4 summers and even camped on top of the mesa and had never seen it until one night. Me and the scout group that I was with were camped on the back side of the mesa, Toothache Springs for those of you familiar. It's a little after sunset and we're all sitting around shooting the breeze. Note here that I hadn't told them any of the haunted stories at this point, when one of the kids points up to the mesa and asks, "What's that?" I figure he's seeing some flashlights coming down the trail from the mesa because I know there's supposed to be another group camping with us, so I tell him. He says that it doesn't look like flashlights to him, so I turn around and goddammit, he's right. The lights weren't coming from where the trail is, they're off the right, and it's not a flashlight. It's like the light is coming from behind the mesa or from a fire that you can't see. Only it's not orange-red like firelight, it's blue. Creepiest shit ever, because if the blue lights are real, what else is real? At this point though I'm still thinking it's that other group, but like 15 minutes later they roll into camp and we can still see the lights. Did not sleep well that night. Oh, and a bear visited in the middle of the night. Didn't hear him but found plenty of evidence. 2. A different summer out there I decided to be a boss, read dumbass, and do some solo night hiking. Night hiking is creepy as fuck by yourself. Route was about 5-ish miles maybe. Crags to Apache Springs. The whole hike you can hear everything, every rustle, every time a rock rolls down a hill, everything. So I'm already kind of spooked at this point. About a mile from my destination I look ahead with my headlamp and see about 20 to 30 bright white lights pointing back at me. I'm about to shit myself when I realize it's just a bunch of deer, out doing whatever it is that deer do. But that first moment before you realize that, holy shit. This story takes place not at a campsite but at an actual kids camp. Summer of 2003, me and 3 friends head out to a kids camp for 2 weeks in Connecticut. We get there and the first few days everything is normal. There are other kids from other parts also camping with us. We are about 20 kids total. One day we are all hanging out in the pool when 3 of the counselors came by and asked us who wanted to take a drive out to a nearby Walmart to stock up on snacks, drinks, etc. since there were no stores nearby. Almost all of the kids got out of the pool to go take a ride except for me and one friend, we'll call him Jake. After about 30 minutes we got tired of sitting in the pool by ourselves, so we got out and went to the front desk of the campground so we can ask the person hosting the camp. It was on somebody else's property, if we can get some bottled water. When we got there, nobody was there. We stood around for 2 minutes and then rang the bell twice. After about another 2 minutes, we realized nobody was around and we decided to just say screw it and to go back to our cabins, which was about 30 feet up the road. We get to our cabins and realize our roommates had the key cards to our rooms, 1 key card per room, 3 people in a room. Jake was also in a different room than me and his key card was also with his roommate who had left. We realized we are kind of screwed and still dripping wet from the pool with nowhere to go. We decide to just start talking about how it was eerie that the whole campgrounds were empty and how weird it was that the person at the front desk wasn't even there. Let me give you a layout of the cabins. There is about 10 cabins side by side with a huge empty space filled with gravel in front for cars to park by the cabins. We decide to stand next to one of our counselors' cars and just speak about whatever comes to mind as we wait for the rest of our peers to return from their Walmart extravaganza. My back is facing the road we walked in from because I am leaning on the car talking to Jake. Jake turns pale out of nowhere and I see the expression on his face change like there is an avalanche coming down at us. With trembling lips he barely mutters out the words "turn around." I turn around and I see a guy literally dressed like the wrestler The Undertaker head to toe, trench coat and all in the middle of summer. His face is pale, hair is long and he has on all black down to the boots. He is standing across the road from the tip of the entrance to the gravel which leads to the cabins. He is facing down from the road to the woods which is very steep and packed with tightly bunched thin trees. As soon as I looked at him he slowly turned his head to the right and looked directly at me and Jake. We froze in fear for what felt like forever but was probably only like 3 seconds. I turned to him to say "who the fuck is that?" As soon as I said that he turned to me to answer and by the time we turned our heads to look back the guy/otherly being was gone. He disappeared in that split 1-second moment of us turning our heads away. We just stood by the car praying to ourselves the next 10 to 15 minutes or so until the counselors came back. When they got back our friends saw me and Jake were visibly shaken up and asked us if everything was all right. We replied yes because we didn't want to seem crazy and figured there was no chance they'd believe us. We sort of forget about the situation for the day and go along hanging out with our friends/counselors. The next morning I wake up to a counselor going ballistic at about 7 a.m. He is knocking on all the cabin doors and calling us outside. I finally get out of bed to see Jake and about 15 other kids from the camp just staring at the counselor's car. Yes, the one me and Jake were standing by the day before. The car was absolutely destroyed. Scratches all over, dents all over, tires popped, etc. Jake just looks at me without saying a word and a look on his face just says he is terrified and wants to leave this camp immediately. He calls his parents to come pick him up and I get stuck there for another 3 days. Nothing else eventful happened after that day but I was sure whatever we saw that day had a message for us to never return. I work in manufacturing. And one of things I make is a camera accessory for HDSLR cameras. I had a customer contact me with a very specific request for a unique setup he was running. In order to help him out, I was asking questions about the type of work he was doing and it took a while, but he finally admitted that he was a Bigfoot hunter. He was embarrassed, but I said that it was totally cool and I was actually very interested. I asked him if he had any experiences, and well, this is what he told me. I'm going to paraphrase since I didn't record the call. In his words, "I'm an avid camper and outdoorsman in North Georgia. I've heard lots of stories of Bigfoot sightings in North Georgia, but I never really gave them much credit. I've had a couple of run-ins, however. There have been a couple of times when I've gone out that when I'm chilling by the campfire at night, I hear movement in the woods and small stones are thrown at me, and I hear strange vocalizations. I've also heard loud screams in the distance that don't sound human." He went on to say that even though there weren't any other people around for miles, he still wasn't 100% convinced that this was an actual Bigfoot encounter, which is why he was talking with me. He bought a few HDSLR cameras and modified them to record night vision and thermal, and needed the rig my company makes to mount it all around the camera. He didn't want to use regular cameras that do night vision and thermal have crappy video quality, and he wanted HD video quality. He also wanted to set up professional audio recording equipment in the campsite, and then in concentric circles going out from the campsite for 100 feet. Honestly, it was a great plan. However, he was funding all this himself and couldn't afford all the equipment. If I wasn't living in California at the time, I would have volunteered my time to actually go out with him and help. Anyway, I always thought it'd be creepy to be out in the woods and have that kind of stuff happen to you. Bigfoot or not, it's actually more creepy if it were regular people doing that. I was doing a section hike of the Appalachian Trail with my 13-year-old son. We were pretty new to backpacking and the app, but had tent camped in campgrounds and stuff a lot. It had sprinkled a little as the afternoon moved into the long warm evening of Georgia in the summer. We came to one of the open Adirondack shelters, and decided it would improve our odds of sleeping dry to stay there. Plus we were tired, and had it to ourselves. Middle of the night, the rain suddenly came down hard on the tin roof. Louder than I expected. Woke me up. And I was glad we had opted for the shelter. No tent would stay dry in that downpour. After about 20 minutes, the rain stopped just as suddenly. And then I heard it. It was loud, long moan or groan or cry. Hard to describe. And racked my brain for animals that make that noise. Coyote? Nope. Deer? Nope. Baying dog? Closer, but the note was about a full octave lower than any hound I had heard before. And gravelly. It seemed to be coming from a much deeper chest. And it sounded sad. More than sad. Anguished. Agonized. Like it was holding its dead life mate. Or had its leg caught in a trap. And then the rain poured again. It drowned out any other sound. Then the rain stopped. And the groan started. It was loud. But not that close. May 1/2 mile, maybe 1/4 mile. Hard to say what it is about sound traveling through the mountain, picking up little echoes or something, but you can tell if it's close or not. And I racked my brain, going outside the box. Maybe it was a frog? A bug? An owl? It was pitch black on a cloudy night, and shining the flashlight around I saw nothing. 2 more cycles, the rain again, a heart-rending groan/cry/bellow again. At least it wasn't getting closer. Eventually I woke up to sunlight. The sound was gone. My son was vaguely aware it had rained, but had heard nothing. Maybe I should have woken him up, not sure now why I didn't. Never have figured out what it was. I was working at a survey station deep in the Malaysian jungle in Borneo, 4 hours in 4x4s to reach this spot from the nearest village. I was sleeping in one of the dorms with some of the rangers we were working with, 5 other people in the dorm. That night I was having a nightmare and woke up at about 2 a.m. to the sound of footsteps outside. Whatever it was fairly big and sounded bipedal. It stopped right outside the window, so I'm staring back at the window trying hard to see. Pitch black in the whole station since it runs on solar power and the batteries give out around midnight. Suddenly one of the rangers shifts in her bed making a noise and I could hear whatever it was running away quite fast. Being a rather skeptical person in general, I woke up and asked the rangers the next day about it. They adamantly believed that it was a jungle spirit coming to check us out. The station is on stilts, so the window sits about 10 feet off the ground. I asked about the possibility of it being a wild animal, but they said that the only things big enough to make that loud of a footprint would have been sun bear, small bear, or a clouded leopard, usually very silent. They said it's generally unheard of for those animals to make it that close to the survey station since there are usually people milling about. The rangers have heard the footsteps before and they firmly believe that a jungle spirit was roaming through to check us out. In year 10, grade 9, some people get to go on a Duke of Edinburgh expedition. Mainly consists of going to the countryside, camping, reading maps, going on massive hikes. You spend 2 nights there, but there are 3 expeditions. One of the teachers is also a certified guide, and he used to live there so he knows the terrain well. So, on our second night, he takes us for a night walk. We're all laughing and joking, until in the distance we see long blinking lights showing in the sky blocking the only safe route. Keep in mind we're in the middle of nowhere, and our guide knows this. He tells us to keep quiet and get down. The lights stop all of a sudden and we continue to pass. As soon as we get into the middle of it, something rushes at us and we all scream. Turns out it was one of our teachers and it was all a big joke. After the commotion calms down, one of the students sees a pair of eyes looking at us, then I spot another and another. They were fairly high up, so we could see they were human. These eyes were looking at us from behind trees and they were slowly advancing at us. We shone our lights on them and the figures were naked and running away. Our guide freaked out. Said that this wasn't a part of the scare, and that there might be people actually looking at us deep into the woods. He shouted at us to run and so we ran back to the campsite. I've asked him about it recently and he has said in his 20 years that it's the scariest thing he's ever experienced.